I'm JJ Perez with Inside Runner Sports. Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News. We are here to recap UTSA football's 37-29 win, Greg, over North Texas.
That is correct.
The Roadrunners win their fifth straight game, become bowl eligible for the fourth straight season. Greg, it seemed like it was really a tale of two halves in this game, but I want to start at the beginning of the game. The Roadrunners come out looking pretty dominant with their rushing game, and I think that was the catalyst today. The defense forced three turnovers, which were huge, and just another solid win for the Roadrunners.
Yeah, it's a huge day for the running game. And it's funny because the week before against East Carolina, it was these big passing plays. There was a big run in there too, but it was the big plays that really got the team going. And in this one, it was the running game that was able to really just have a lot of success in the opening drive. In particular, Kavorian Barnes, I think, had like 51 yards just on that drive by itself and ended up punching in the touchdown. And we saw all three of the top running backs score in the first half. Rocco Griffin got in there, and I thought he looked really fast where he had been, even though he had a big run the week before. I just think he's probably getting healthier. I know there was like a knee thing that he's kind of been playing through a little bit here. Robert Henry, who looks like the best running back the first few weeks of the season, was actually the least productive of the group, which is a good problem to have because it still looks like a real chore for anybody to try to tackle him. Every one of his runs is such an adventure for the defense. So I think that the running game is probably in the kind of place that UTSA fans would have hoped that it would be for the whole season, and really for years past too. Jeff Traylor's talked about wanting to have a three-headed option at running back, and it seems like they have that now with all three guys that are kind of clicking in an offensive line that is doing enough to create openings for them. So I really thought the running game, especially in the first half, was the story of the game and their ability to just take control of it.
You saw the UTSA defense. This North Texas offense came in as the number one scoring offense in the league, and they did put up a lot of yards, but I don't think it was as much as many people would have thought coming in.
Yeah, I do think that UTSA made a little bit of an effort to force North Texas to not be able to do exactly what they would want to do, in the sense of just being able to play this air raid approach and move the ball down the field through the air. It was interesting. The first couple snaps of the game, Brandon Brown had the sack and then nearly had a second one on the very next play. And I think after that 3-and-out drive, North Texas seemed to try to do a little bit more to make sure the pressure couldn't get home in the same way, whether it was rolling Rodgers out of the pocket or being more quicker with some of the reads, or even just getting the running game going a little bit, because I do think UTSA was probably more indexed on the pass and was more worried about how to stop that. And that's why we saw North Texas probably have a little bit of success, at least in terms of the average on the ground. And, it's funny because last time that UTSA was in Denton, which we can talk about, it was the running game that really went crazy with Texas and gave them a lot of trouble. And it seems like whenever these teams have met, that those running backs have been able to get a little bit of work done. So it was interesting that UTSA, of course, given the tendencies of this new offense under Coach Eric Morris, was going to look at the pass first, and they did a decent enough job limiting that. But like you said, I think the turnovers were key, and especially the times at which they came through. For Rashad Wisdom and DeJuan Griffin to get that fumble, as North Texas looked like they were going in. They were all the way down to the 5-yard line before that one got knocked free. And then the two interceptions, which were, in some ways fortunate, that Nick Booker-Brown gets hands on the ball and it goes right to Trey Moore. And then I think it was Martavius French gets hands on the ball and it goes right to Danye Taylor. But you create that with the pressure that you put on an opposing offense, and then just with having guys in the right spots, and being able to deflect the pass is not free. That's a good play by those guys too. So even though it sort of landed where it needed to for UTSA to do something with it, it was a strong defensive performance to create those turnovers. And those are kind of the things when we talked earlier in the year about why the turnovers weren't there. We thought they were doing a lot of the things that would lead to that eventually. So I think that's why we probably didn't panic on that front as much as a lot of people might have wanted to, or might have had a different perspective on it. It was something that was just sort of going to show up over time. It appeared, and they're seeing the benefits of that now when they need it most, I guess.
Right. And those three turnovers, UTSA scores 13 points off those turnovers. The Roadrunners don't have a turnover themselves. There was a muff punt they were able to recover that was pretty big. But Greg, what happened to the Roadrunners in the second half? I know we were both kind of riding and maybe weren't paying attention as much. I tried to go back and watch a little bit of it. It just seemed like they got out of rhythm, and kind of both teams weren't playing great, but there was a little bit maybe more sense of urgency with North Texas.
Yeah, I haven't gotten a chance to review it yet, even with the extra hour. I'm still in basketball preview mode. So I haven't gotten a chance to look back at it. But what it seemed like was, I think everybody was a little disappointed the first drive of the second half that it was three straight passing plays that out. But we talked to Jeff Traylor after the game, and it was RPO calls, and just the read was to pass it. So you can look at the stat sheet and say there were 3 straight passing plays, but I mean, not hasn't worked before. I don't believe it was vastly different play calling than what they did in the opening half. And then I think because it was, hey, we've had so much success running the ball, why don't we do that more? That I think the next drive floundered because they tried too hard to make the handoffs and to try to do what they had done in the first half that led to some success. And so suddenly now that's 2 drives that are down the drain. And then I don't know, it just seemed like they couldn't click at the highest level. Obviously when they had the touchdown that they critically needed there in the fourth quarter, turn the ball all the way inside the 10-yard line. So I think I'd have to take a closer look just to understand why those drives weren't coming together the same way they were in the first half. You never know what kind of adjustments North Texas made once it became clear that UTSA was going to try to gash them on the ground and not as much through the air. And by the same token, UTSA was then not necessarily going to go away from that game plan because they had a lead trying to bleed clock. So I think it all kind of comes together that they became predictable for a reason. And it just allowed North Texas to create a little bit of positive activity there defensively. So I don't have a perfect read on it, but it seems like, I don't know, it's not something I'd be panicked about going forward. It was certainly one of Frank Harris's least productive passing games, but seemed like it was a product of, as the cliche goes, taking what the defense was allowing him to do. And if anything, I was really encouraged by the extent to which he ran with the ball and made some plays on the ground, because we've seen with the turf toe and maybe any other number of nagging injuries that he might be dealing with at this point in his career that he just hasn't looked to run as much, and they haven't called plays. But even I thought there was an interesting one late in the second quarter where it would have been very easy to just run it up the middle and go into halftime, but they had Frank take off on a designed run on that play. I think there was some option elements too. It wasn't like a straight draw, but still the idea that there would be a read where Frank could run with the ball at that stage where it wasn't likely to amount to points. And of course, being Frank, he made something huge out of it. He got the 30-yard gain and then drew the personal foul. And so suddenly they were in range to get that field goal before halftime. So the fact that they're looking to his offense, it's not like it was a fourth quarter drive where they're down 6 and they need to score. Like that was the first half where they didn't really necessarily need to make something happen there. And they were comfortable enough to go with that call that allowed Frank to get loose. So I think that probably speaks to the extent to which he's becoming healthier, and that later in the season in critical matchups, they're more willing to go to that and accept the risk that he doesn't get up after the play as quickly as he might, and that it impacts him going forward because there's just not that many games left in his career.
Yeah, it seems like the Frank Harris of old is sort of rounding into form here as we head down the stretch of the season, 9 games into this 2023 season. Especially, I mean, you could talk about how the offense struggled in that second half, but when they needed the offense to finish the game on the field, they were able to pick up, I think, 2 short yardage conversions, and they did lean on Frank on those quarterback sneaks. So, you think Frank Harris's best football is still ahead of him this season, or is it still hard to say? Because I mean, he still hasn't gotten a lot of reps and not the same amount that he usually gets that he would have had to shape into form. I mean, I would say he's probably in mid-season form for a normal
Yeah.
season.
Well, it still feels like if 2023 Frank Harris had a race like 2020 and 2021 Frank Harris, he would lose. I don't think this version is as fast for whatever reason, and maybe it's part of the injury, or maybe he's still working through some other things as well. So I don't know if he's going to be exactly the same most dynamic threat, the best we've ever seen him kind of thing, but you don't need to be to still be a really, really elite player in this team and in this league. So I think that certainly we've seen from a passing perspective, he knocked off some of the rust that we saw in the Houston game. I don't think anybody would expect that he's going to come out 3 interceptions again anytime soon. I don't remember. I know he finished 13 of 25 yesterday, so it's a lower completion percentage than he usually has, but I don't remember there being a ton of bad throws, whereas early in the season, I think there were a couple felt like he might have been off on something here or there. It was a coverage situation where they just kind of weren't allowing him to complete the passes he wanted to complete, or maybe there was at least 1 or 2 throwaways in there, I feel like, too. So I'm not 100% sure if maybe his passing was a little bit off yesterday, or if it was just a product of the circumstances. But generally, it seems like through the year, the passing game has been trending up, and the willingness to go to the running game has been trending up, even if he hasn't been as dynamic as we've seen in the past. So overall, I think you're getting a pretty elite version of him down the stretch. I don't know. How do you compare him to where he's been at other points in his career?
Yeah, I mean, I think just the more he plays, the better he's going to get. And it's like your point. He was playing at a maybe all-time level last season and the season before, and I don't know that he'll get back there, but to your point, he doesn't need to get back there. So, um, this win for the Roadrunners was the first win in Denton since 2013, and the Roadrunners actually, the last time they played there 2 years ago, had maybe their worst loss in the Jeff Traylor era. The team kind of downplayed that in the week headed into the game, but it's obviously there was something at least in the back of their minds, right, Greg?
Yeah, I don't think it was necessarily something that the coaches talked about too much. It sounded like it came up right after the East Carolina game. Maybe as a reminder, just to instantly get refocused and remember there's this big challenge out there that's given them problems in the past. But I don't think that it was something that they harassed them about through the week. It sounded like maybe the a little bit amongst themselves, and the ones who were there just kind of knew. And they were they seemed to be marginally honest about that through the week, that it did impact them, that they were worried about it. But I think you really saw after the game the extent to which it sort of added to the emotions and compiled with thing that went into the game of being able to say you're still undefeated in the conference, you're still on track for your goal of being able to play conference championship. And as much as it was very much a matter of fact, going to happen eventually kind of thing, to be able to say you're bowl eligible and to have a reason to celebrate that, I think added another layer as well. So we talked about how rambunctious, let's say, the locker room was after FAU, and there's been a couple different times this year that, given the slow start, it felt like there was a different level of enjoyment and appreciation for what they were able to accomplish in some of these games. And I think this goes right up there. Even if the second half was a little disappointing, I feel like there might have been times in the past, maybe during the 11-0 season, where they'd come out kind of negative about the game. We really have to improve. And there was some of that. But I think generally there was a lot more just appreciation for what they accomplished in this game and what it means.
Yeah, Greg. So 10 long years since the Roadrunners have won there. That includes the four most recent losses to North Texas and the two bowl games in the DFW area. So much like Florida a few weeks ago, a monkey off the Roadrunners' back. What's your take on, I guess, the Roadrunners celebrating the bowl eligibility? It's still kind of an important milestone. 4 straight wins, the Roadrunners get there. Or 4 straight years, the Roadrunners get hit that milestone.
Yeah, I think it's important to celebrate it, just as a reminder that it's not something you can take for granted. I mean, I think a lot of people by this point have seen the way Texas State celebrated bowl eligibility, and sometimes there was a part of me that was like, this seems like a lot, but you know what? I think you should celebrate the things that you achieve and that are, especially when you haven't done it for a while. And so I think the fact that just because that's become the norm for UTSA, it wasn't always. And I think it's a sort of a reminder of where the program came from. And, Jeff Traylor always talks about having an attitude of gratitude. I think he says, and just an appreciation for what you're able to do. It's very easy when you get caught up in the grind of the season and how quickly they try to turn the page to the next game, to not take the chance to enjoy it and celebrate the things that you feel like you should be able to celebrate. So I have no issue with that. And I think it's probably a good thing to make sure that they do, because I don't know. I hope every school, takes the time to do that. I'm sure I don't know if Georgia celebrates bowl eligibility,
Right.
but you know what I mean? I think it's important while you're still kind of growing and getting to that stage where this can truly be an every year thing and it's not a question anymore, that you enjoy it while you're on that rise.
The Roadrunners improved to a perfect 5-0 league record, the first team to hit the 5-win mark. But later on yesterday, the Roadrunners are Tulane joined that, SMU joined that. Both teams held on. Memphis has one loss. They're kind of in the hunt. This American Conference looks like it's going to come down to the end here with this 2023 season, as far as who the two participants are going to be in the league title game.
Yeah, and it seemed like early in the season, and even as recently as a week or two ago, that Tulane and SMU in particular were a cut above. But it's just week after week, it seems like Tulane is in these really competitive games with teams that I think that they're going to be able to beat more easily. And I don't know if I would be interested to look at their record against the spread in recent weeks. I'm not sure what it feels like. They are, I don't want to say underperforming when you're undefeated, and obviously deserve to be undefeated based on what you accomplished last year and the strength of your team. But it does seem like they are not this juggernaut that UTSA couldn't go over there and hang in with. So I think that the gap, if anything, is kind of narrowing in the league. And I don't have a great read on SMU. I know they were just destroying people for a few weeks there, but then to play really close with Rice, it seems like they're kind of gettable too. So I don't know what the season-long advanced analytics would say at this point. I'll double check them again later today. It's part of my Sunday routine usually, but I think that if anything, UTSA right now is trending in as much of a positive direction as anybody else in the league, which goes without saying. For a time yesterday, we were tracking, it would have been the first time in program history that they'd won 5 games in a row by double digits. Even during the 11-0 season, there were a couple that were close. And how often have we talked about these crazy dramatic finishes under Jeff Traylor? And it had been 4 weeks in a row they'd won by at least 2 touchdowns. So they're just in top form right now, it seems like. And we know they were a little bit banged up yesterday. Not a ton of super, super critical guys they're without at this point, but maybe it would be some depth pieces back. And at this point, it seems like probably planning around not having DeCorian Clark and not having Mekhi Hart, but they've been in that situation long enough that they are able to adjust. They have a new game plan now and a new way to make work without those guys.
Well, one thing I think I'll add to the conference discussion on the competition side is you see like a 3-win Temple team gave UTSA all they could handle. A 1-win East Carolina team, played really physical against the Roadrunners. And a 3-win North Texas team was 1 score away from UTSA. So I think the margin of error between the all the teams is a little bit tighter than what we saw in Conference USA. And I think we've seen that a little bit Rice has gone toe to toe with Tulane and SMU the last 2 weeks, and they arguably should have won both of those games. So,
yeah, I don't want to. I'll disagree a little bit, not too hard. I still think there's a divide between that top 4 that you mentioned with UTSA, Tulane, SMU, and Memphis, and then everybody else. Granted, some of those games have been pretty close. I think that's going to happen over the course of a year, but generally, I think those teams have been better than the other teams. And we've seen, I don't want to downplay the extent to which UTSA handled some of these games the last few weeks. They were in control of a lot of these games and deserved to win. So I do think that group is a cut above, but maybe the divide isn't as big as I think it is.
I do agree that the Roadrunners are trending up. It does seem like right now, with 3 games left in the regular season, is the only thing stopping the Roadrunners themselves? Is it just going to come down to execution and whatever avoidance of injuries they could have these last 3 games of the season to see if they can qualify for that league title game?
Well, yeah, you just tweeted it. What's the line for next week?
9. Rice is 9.
So yeah, I think that makes sense, and I think it'll probably be about the same the following week. The fact that they can be 2 games at home to get to the showdown with Tulane is really sort of how I've been sort of dividing up the season. It's a quest to get to that point. That feels like a playoff semifinal kind of thing. You know what I mean? It's less than the last game of the regular season. It's sort of exists in a class above that, where you think of that as your first conference championship game, and then you have to go win another one, potentially against the same team, depending how it shakes out. But we'll see. It seems like, I don't know what SMU's schedule looks like. They have a Memphis game, right?
Right. Yeah. 2 weeks.
It's possible. Yeah. It's possible they could slip up somewhere and a 1-loss team could be involved in that championship game scenario, but it's probably more likely that you have to win all your games to get there. So yeah, I don't want to, the next 2 weeks, the only thing that could stop UTSA is UTSA. They have to underperform to drop one of those games. After that, they could play their best football and still lose to Tulane, because Tulane's that good, especially when UTSA has to go on the road for that game. But we did talk about this last week. I don't think we've ever mentioned it in a public space, but UTSA plays on a Friday before that game, and Tulane plays a road game on a Saturday. So it depends. I don't know if the kickoff time for that one's out yet, but if they're on the road at night and UTSA is done with the home game on Friday, I think that's a little bit of an advantage as you think about the rest edge heading into a Friday game in New Orleans. So maybe there's more and more reasons that this is looking like something UTSA can pull off. So it's certainly quite a departure from probably where we were on those chances a month ago.
Yeah, there's even a potential for a 14 tie the way the schedule lays out. So we'll see. I posted all those tiebreakers. It's kind of complicated, but it's basically, head to head college football playoff ranking and computer ratings.
I'm glad you brought that up, because regardless of how this plays out, I have to try to remember for next year, when we talk about the way Jeff Traylor approaches the non-conference season, treating it as kind of a tune-up, if your league is going to use season-long computer rankings to determine who plays for a championship, you absolutely can't do that. So I think it sort of was an understandable approach, and it still is, and it might not come down to that most years, but I think there's room for probably a little bit more accountability, is too harsh of a word, but a little bit more focus and attention to detail with that, compared to treating it as just a tune-up portion of the season. So I wonder if they will change the approach on that, seeing the results this year and understanding the stakes of it in the new league.
Yeah, I don't know what factors into the computer rankings. Obviously, the entire record does somewhere in strength of schedule and all that stuff as well. But we'll see. I think the Roadrunners are trending up, Greg, and man, these next 2 weeks are going to be pretty interesting. Rice has played well. Certainly not going to be a pushover, I don't think, but I think we'll see a lot of the same style of football we've seen from the Roadrunners these last few weeks.
Yeah, UTSA has been had kind of an easy time with Rice the last couple of years.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's something about that matchup that allows them to thrive, and if that trend will continue, I think that's something to keep an eye on in case they just kind of have their number for whatever reason. But generally, it does seem like Rice has jumped up in scenarios where you'd expect, and maybe underperformed in other cases where you'd expect them to do well. So it's hard to know what you're going to get with that group. But I do think the other thing we have to keep an eye on that's going to be interesting is, I don't know that they'll get too caught up in this, but there's also going to be the narratives about the last home games for this group of seniors, especially guys like Frank Harris and Rashad Wisdom and all that they've done here. So I don't know what extent the emotions of that will come into play on the field, but I think it's certainly something we'll be talking about off the field. So it's going to be kind of an interesting period for that as well.
Yep, I agree 100%. Two home games left in the careers of a lot of the guys like Frank Harris and Rashad Wisdom. So, well, Greg, I think did we hit on everything? Got this one wrapped up? I think
I
that'll
think so. It was kind of I feel like we came away with probably less talking points in this
yeah.
game than a lot of others, and maybe that was just my perception of it, but it seemed pretty standard that, run the ball and then second half lull and then turnovers carry you and you're still undefeated. And we spent a lot of time talking about what it meant in the context of the last trip to Denton rather than focusing on the microscopic of this game, and then also the big picture of clearing one of the biggest hurdles on the path to the conference title. So I think in the micro, if we want to talk about the not having Devin McEwen and who else, we didn't get as much into the weeds on a lot of that stuff. So that'll be for this week. So just keep an eye on Monday's interview with Jeff and everything else that happens to get all your updates in the nitty gritty.
Sounds good. Well, Greg, that'll wrap it up. JJ Perez, Inside Runner Sports, Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News. Thank you guys for watching.